Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Call Time. My name, as always, is Bryan M. Joining me today is Ted. Oh, please don't let me mess up this name. Gajon?
Geoghegan.
Gagan. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like I look at the name, I'm like, it looks like it's Geohegan, but
Yeah,
and there's
that's
also
I get Geohegan a lot.
but yeah, Ted is a horror director, or rather, person who works in the horror field, and he has a new movie coming out on Shudder. This is not at all paid programming by Shudder. I wish I had a Shudder sponsor. Please do sponsor me, sir. I love my horror. Um, but yeah, he has a new movie coming out called Brooklyn 45. It's premiering on Shudder exclusively as a Shudder original movie. So, Ted, can you please take it away about how did you come up with the concept of a seance going wrong? Yeah, of a seance going wrong, especially in a because when I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, I like how it's only one singular location, which I assume is gonna be like one room, and it has the concept of a seance going wrong. I'm like, okay, we have horror films where it's like, oh, we have the Ouija board going wrong, we have someone talking to a ghost going wrong, or something like that. But I never really see uh, a ghost movie where it's a seance going wrong. And the times I've seen that is maybe Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell,
Sure.
which is played more comedically, considering,
Yeah.
this is more played more seriously. So how
Yeah.
did you come up with that concept?
Well, a lot of it's derived from We Are Still Here, a film that I made in 2015. That movie has a seance sequence in it between two middle-aged dads, Larry Fessenden and Andrew Sensenig. And it's a really fun sequence that people always really enjoyed. And when I was on the festival circuit with We Are Still Here, whenever we'd finish a screening and I'd go to do a Q&A, I'd always have people tell me like, "Oh, I really love that seance scene. That seance scene's so great." And I was always like, my joke answer was always, well, if you like that seance scene so much, my next movie is just going to be one big seance. And like that jokey statement kind of was the seed that got planted that turned into Brooklyn 45. And I made Mohawk first. I made another film
Yeah.
after Still Here before I made this. Um, but that was kind of the lead into it. People dig seances. They think it's fun, whether they're very spiritual or whether they're like me and they're not really a believer. They're kind of more agnostic.
Hmm.
um I just think it's a fun concept. It reminds us of yesteryear, and as someone who really is not a fan of the present, any chance I can get to escape the present, I will most certainly take. So
Yeah.
it really
Like,
is kind of born from We Are Still Here.
and it's kind of interesting how you also place this movie like post World War II kind of like era, because that's an interesting field to go into, because not because you have a lot of veterans returning home, you have people just returning home from just being in a all-out war for at least a half a decade by that point, even more so if you're pre like World War II.
Yeah.
Uh, like, and I know from reading up on this movie, you wrote this film with your father, and how much input did you both? I mean, how much input did not only he have into writing the movie, but also input from you as well, from
Yeah.
a filmmaking standpoint?
Yeah. So my father served in the United States Air Force. He was a staff sergeant, and he was paralyzed in a car accident in the early 1970s and was honorably discharged from the military. And after he left the military, he went back to school and got his degree in U.S. history. And he
Hmm.
learned all about U.S. history. It became a passion of his. And while working on this script, I thought, like, who better to ask for advice than my father, who has lived the military, and not only that, but is a scholar of U.S. history. And so I was having some trouble figuring out how to get from point A to point B in the script. And so I reached out to my dad and I said, look, dad, like these are the first 30 pages of the script. And I know what happens next. I just don't know how to get there. And my dad said, well, like, I'm not creative. This isn't my realm of expertise. But he said, I'll look at it and see. And so he read it and he told me, like, well, this guy wouldn't be a colonel, he'd be a sergeant, and this guy wouldn't be a
Hmm.
major, he'd be a general. And he would give me all these kind of like just little bits of information, especially when it came down to like what battles during World War II they were in, like what their regiments were, like these very specific sort of things. And it sounds kind of douchey, but like once he gave me that information, like all the characters kind of like came to life. Like they all just like,
Hmm.
and I instantly like knew like where the rest of the script was going, like instantly. And all of my like writer's block that I had was just gone. And I spit out the first draft of the script in days after he gave me that first round of notes. And then we sent the script back and forth 6 or 7 times before it was completed. And then
Hmm. Wow.
when we uh when we finished it, my father didn't write it, he just gave notes.
Yeah.
I wrote it with the assistance of my father, but I wrote the screenplay and my dad, helped me write it.
Yeah.
And, we went back and forth on it, like I said, 6 or 7 times. And finally, he called me up in early 2019 and said, like, yeah, man, it's done. I can't wait to watch this movie. And I was like, yeah, I can't wait for you to see it. And we hung up the phone, and it was the last time I ever spoke to him. He passed away that day. That was the
Oh,
last,
wow. I'm
very
sorry.
very unexpectedly. And so the movie suddenly became like really personal to me, and I realized like I have
Yeah.
one chance to make a movie with my dad, and I can't fuck it up. So I spent a long time trying to make sure that I found the right team to make this film with, because, like I said, I had one opportunity to make a movie with my dad. I wanted to do it right.
I could believe that. I can understand that completely. I lost my mother last year. And a lot of my heart and soul into personal products of mine came from the love of my mother. So it's like, and I'm an actor as well. So when I'm on stage, I feel like I'm also honoring my mother as well. So it's like I can
Yep.
understand you as a filmmaker, just like, hey, there's this project I just did with my father. We practically did a whole we shed, blood and bone, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but in terms of the actual film itself, how did you come up with the title Brooklyn 45? Because when I read it, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, Brooklyn 45. I'm like, this has to have, obviously Brooklyn Intel. You can't really, unless it's like Brooklyn, Wisconsin or some other place like
Right.
called Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now
like, how did
I'm
you come, like, yeah, how did you come up with the title?
I'm just a big fan of making genre movies that don't have like heavy genre leaning titles. I'm not a big fan of, like, Sorority Bloodbath Massacre. I mean, I love those movies. Like that sort of stuff is in my veins. I love silly exploitation. But I don't see myself ever making a movie that has like, the word massacre in the title, and so
Yeah.
like we are still here in Mohawk. They're both kind of very like, if you didn't know they were horror movies, you might be like, well, what is this movie? And similarly with Brooklyn 45. But I mean, that I wanted it to be a question, like what is this movie about? You've got Brooklyn and you've got 45, and as soon as you hear it's a period piece, you can put it together pretty easily that
Yeah.
it's in Brooklyn in 1945. But I also want it to kind of hint at other things, like a gun features very prominently in the movie, and we think of like a 45 as
Yeah.
a gun. We think of like a lot of people equate the word 40, not 45, but like 40, like to alcohol. You think of like a 40 ounce of alcohol, and there's a lot of alcohol that's drank in the film. um
Oh,
i
yeah.
I like titles that kind of make you feel something without knowing exactly what it is that you're feeling. And similarly, like We Are Still Here, who is saying we are still here in that movie? Is it the family? Is it the ghosts? Is it someone else? What do they mean by we are still here? And similarly, like Mohawk, like, I think when people hear the word Mohawk, the first thing they think of is like, punk rockers with that badass
Yeah.
haircut. But it ends up being like a sad, angry action drama, set during the War of 1812 about the indigenous Mohawk people, who were the original badass, take no shit counterculture people. And there's a reason
Yeah.
why people who take no shit wear a mohawk, because it comes from an indigenous group of people who took
Hmm.
absolutely no shit. And so, but I want people to hear the word mohawk and go like, oh, is it going to be about punk rockers? And it's like, well, it kind of is. It's about the original
Yeah.
punk rock people. Like, um, so I always kind of leave people wanting to know a little bit more. I think that's one of the real joys of titles, is not just not just wearing your whole story on your sleeve.
Hmm. Now you mentioned We Are Still Here and We Are Still Here and Mohawk and Brooklyn 45 as well. And I mentioned these are like period pieces because they do take place in a particular period. As we just mentioned, Brooklyn 45 takes place in post-World War II. Uh, Mohawk takes place in the War of 1812. And I think We Are Still Here is a 70s piece, I
That
think. When it
1979, yeah.
came when it came to writing these movies, did you have like a certain influence of, okay, this is the type of movie I'm thinking of, or at least this is the type of movie I want to watch just to get in the right mood? Because, it's like when I'm writing something and it's like, oh, okay. A perfect example is like I like to listen to music when I'm writing, and most of the music comes from like musicals. I mean, scores from other movies, like
Sure.
mostly like Jerry Goldsmith, Hans Zimmer, so forth and so on. When it came to saying, okay, this is definitely a different tone in terms of this movie, like what type of movie or type of influence did you have on this movie compared to the other movies?
So, I guess to start at the beginning, We Are Still Here was very heavily influenced by the works of Lucio Fulci.
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of people always go directly to Argento when they're talking about Italian horror, or Mario Bava. But I grew up on Fulci movies, and I find a great charm in them. And so that was a very strong influence, not just on the plot, but on the whole aesthetic of the film, like right down to like the acting style, like making that film a melodrama. Mohawk, which is set during the War of 1812. And like I said, it kind of plays out more like a drama action film that occasionally like explodes into some kind of horrific violence here and
Yeah.
there. Um, it's very like inspired by John Borman films, Emerald Forest, Excalibur, stuff like that. That they're action movies, but really they're kind of these slow plotting dramas that occasionally people get their heads ripped off in. And I think there's a real just amazing power in those films. One of the other important things that we did with Mohawk is it was shot completely with natural light and almost completely set during the day. Um,
Yeah.
that's a very different thing to do, with a film that's kind of intentionally a thriller. So we watched a lot of films that were shot with natural light. I previously mentioned, the Emerald Forest. Um, but stuff like we were or just stuff that set a lot of it set during the day. Watched Ravenous, one of my all-time favorites, Antonia Bird's Ravenous, which is a period piece set a lot of it during the day with a lot of natural light. Those sort of titles, Fitzcarraldo, like big epic movies set out in the middle of nowhere, with people just kicking ass making movies. That was kind of our inspiration. And then with Brooklyn 45, it is inspired by the cinema of the 1940s, very much
Hmm.
so. The movie opens and ends in Academy ratio, in old school like 4:3 box
Oh.
ratio, and then once the film gets underway, it opens up into scope. but the film does start and end like a classic piece of cinema. And really in terms of like its look and feel, one of the biggest influences on the movie was the 1985 film Clue, which is a
Oh.
movie I really love. Just in terms of the decor, like the way people are dressed, the way people are, coiffed, the room itself. The Clue definitely has its fingerprints all over the film. Even though that film is set about 10 years later, Clue's set during the 1950s.
Yeah.
It does give a lot of itself to this movie, which was a joy to kind of be able to honor that. And lots of single room films, chamber pieces, because the movie,
Yeah.
Brooklyn 45 it's set in real time. It all takes place over about 85 minutes. 85 minutes of these people's lives. And aside from the opening and closing of the film, which, are only about a minute long, the entire film is set inside the parlor of this Brooklyn brownstone. So we watched a lot of chamber pieces, movies set in one room, everything from thrillers to stuff like My Dinner with Andre, just to see how do you keep it engaging when you've just got two people sitting at a table? Well, my movie has five people sitting at a table, so it's important to watch stuff like My Dinner with
Yeah.
Andre to like learn what the tricks were. So
And speaking of tricks, how did your filmmaking prowess change from not only from your last movie, Mohawk, into Brooklyn 45, where it is essentially, I have to bring it up, COVID kind of like changed things in terms of like directing and whatnot. And I've had, directors and other filmmakers and other actors talking about their experiences with that. How did that change your filmmaking process? Because did you have to go, okay, you can't have these people this close together or that close together, or the
so we shot this film right around the holidays in 2021. Um,
Hmm.
so we started shooting, and a few days after we started shooting was when the Omicron variant started to spread. And so we were all obviously very, very scared. I mean, we were already, on pins and needles, just shooting during COVID. So, to have this new dangerous, very quickly spreading variant going around was also very scary. We just took all of the necessary precautions. We went completely by the union guidebooks. We tested all the time. I forget how often it was, every other day, I believe. We were just ultra careful. Obviously, our crew never took their masks off. That was very important. The actors were masked unless they were on set. And just watching ourselves, just being very aware of what was going on, and
Hmm.
and being very, very respectful of everyone's fears, and understanding that this virus is a real thing and it's terrifying. And
Yeah.
over a million people lost their lives to it. It's scary, and we took it very seriously on set. And I'm very grateful that we did. We Yeah, just top to bottom, we just didn't fuck around. And I think that's very important for all those films that shot during COVID, as well as the films that are shooting now. I mean, I know a
Yeah.
lot of rules have stopped on film sets. I haven't been on a film set since Brooklyn 45. But I know a lot of the rules have changed, which is wild. So I just hope people
And
stay safe.
of course, and I think one of my last questions is about from the trailer alone. It does show that there is going to be special effects in the movie, both physical effects and also uh, visual effects. In terms of both, how did you work that into the filming, especially when it's like a more condensed location, because a more single location, especially if it's around one table.
Yeah. So I am a big practical effects fan, as I know we all are, especially as lovers of genre cinema. And it's always my intention to do everything as practically as possible, just top to bottom. Practical effects are very important to me. and I think they should be to all filmmakers. The effects that you see in the trailer are almost completely practical. There is almost no VFX work in the film.
Hmm.
There's very limited work. But most of the effects are done practically, and like if you see in the trailer the ectoplasmic hand that comes out of the table and then recedes back into the table, that was done practically. We
Oh
actually
wow.
we cut a hole in the table and covered it with ectoplasm, and we had an actor stick their arm up through the table
Hmm.
and play the role of the arm and then pull it back down through the table. And it's really quite stunning. It's kind of similar to the way they did the effects in like look at Ghostbusters in the 80s. You
Yeah.
know, those were effects. It's glass plate photography. It's where you actually shoot it practically, and then you basically project it onto glass so it becomes transparent. But you shot it on set with everything else, and the actors were actually able to react to it. You know, the actors sat around the table as that actress, you know, moved her hand around. They were actually looking at the hand, which is a real joy. It's so much fun to be able to do that.
Yeah, like I said, Brooklyn 45 comes out next week. Yeah, next week on Shudder, or the first week of Shudder.
And
I mean, the
depends on
first
when
week of
this episode
June.
airs. So
Yeah, it should be like I'm hoping to get it done before this episode airs, so which should be in the next like maybe a few days or so.
there
Because
you
I
go.
work
It
for
comes out
this is what happens
June 9th. So we still got a few
June
weeks.
9th on Shudder.
So June 9th
Yes.
on Shutter and AMC Plus. And then
Oh,
we'll see what goes after that.
I think my last question is kind of fairly obvious, is that whoever is watching this and is a not aspiring filmmaker who is still struggling to put in their work into not only into a genre or just because of what's happening right now, like how do you what advice do you have for those aspiring filmmakers who are still like in their like why am I still doing this when I have no like good thoughts going into the into these I in other words, like what type of advice do you have for aspiring filmmakers? There we go.
Yeah. So I mean it's as simple as, you know, it sounds like a real dick thing to say, but don't quit your day job. Don't, you know, like I have a day job. I'm not a professional filmmaker all the time, you know, like none of these folks are. I mean, unless you were lucky enough to be born into money and you're a trust fund kid or you're whatever, like we don't make a lot of money doing this. We do it because we love it. We
Yeah.
do it 'cause we care about it, and we take time off of our day jobs to make movies. And you know, I will likely never quit my day job. And this is a wonderful hobby that occasionally affords me a small paycheck and a lot of
Hmm.
joy just to be able to make some art. You know, like I I've been at this for 22 years now. My first produced screenplay was in 2001, and I've been at this for a long time, and I've never been able to make a career out of it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing it. Like it's special to me. It's important to be able to get my stories out there, and I'm gonna keep doing it until somebody won't let me do it anymore.
And with that, I think it's a good way to end this episode. Thank you for always to joining me in in call time. As always, just please be safe, be well, and take care, everybody.